Welcome, everybody. Tonight we are working on our Unit 13 database assignment. And the topic for tonight is how to secure a database. There is a document here that you should open, and it both kind of guides our lab activity. So it gives you a step-by-step of what to do all the way through. So in principle, you really don't even need to listen to me in this silly video I'm recording right now. To get this done, you can undertake this on your own. I think I made it clear enough in the document that that's possible. Unlike a traditional assignment where you're kind of posed a challenge and you have to write some code and hopefully you get it right, this is completely guided to kind of demonstrate certain features. These are, I would say, advanced features of working with a database. They're not necessarily something that, low-level database people have to contend with on a regular basis, but you do need to be aware of how this stuff works. And at the very least, I'm hoping that you understand that the way that databases are put together and the way the data stays, complete, accurate, and doesn't get messed with is often based on the things that we're going to do here tonight. The general purpose really is that we are going to set up user accounts and roles and take a look at those things so that we understand how those things impact your ability to work inside of a database system. Because right now we are working within MySQL as the root, or basically the administrator or the master user of the database. Why? Because we've loaded an implementation of MySQL Server on our hard drive. It's our machine, right? So we own the machine. So we own that implementation, and it makes sense for us to be the master user. And then when we bring up MySQL Workbench and have it connect to our local implementation of MySQL, we're in control of all of that. And then when we go in and do all the stuff we did in this class, we had complete create and destroy control over all of it, right? And in a production environment, so meaning in like when you really have a database out there that's running a company or organization or is the back end of an application, that is not a safe way to operate. Even the people that have that power don't typically access a database with that complete create destroy control because of the risks involved with that capability. So in other words, you might take that role to build a database and get it up and running and put all the stuff into it. But then when you do like a query or extract a little information or create a view or run a procedure or something like that, usually you do it at a lower level because your functional purpose for doing it is related to a simple activity like, hey, how many students that I have that are getting a passing grade might be like a query that you do. And I just need the information to come back. I don't need to like build a table or write a procedure or drop a database or create a tape, none of that stuff, right? It's all low level stuff. It's all informational. So those are all the considerations that we use to operate. And once again, the reason that we do that is so that we don't mess up the database. A database often, especially for large enterprise organization, is often the heart of all the information that drives the operational tasks within that organization, right? So think about this. When you go to your bank and you make a deposit or do a withdrawal, how do they keep track of your money? Well, it's in a database, folks, right? Would you want anybody to be able to go in there and tinker with it? Absolutely not, right? So you want to limit access, you want to limit control, you want to limit who can see it, you want to limit who can like read and write to your account, for example. And the same is true when we're working with a database. Okay, so I'm going to begin now by going into MySQL Workbench. So I got to get my document out of the way there. That was probably a silly way to do it, but I did it that way anyhow. And so MySQL is launching in the background here. And you'll see that I have a new tile here. We'll talk about how to do that. But for right now, I do want you just to log in as normal. So if you get to the main welcome screen here, just click the local instance and log in as the root user. In the left sidebar, you will notice all the databases that we've been working with all semester long. You'll notice that I was tinkering with the assignment descriptions here, which is why I have that silly query in the window. But this is where we're going to start. All right, so I'm going to pull the document up and I'm going to follow the instructions here. All right, so you're supposed to open it up, log into the root account, enter your password if you don't have it saved, and then go to the server menu and explore the menu items and take note of what these tools do. Do not change any settings. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk slowly through that menu and hit, not all the menu items, but most of them, and talk about what they do. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, go to the menu, and then I'm going to check the server status. Now, some of this you may have already played with, so some people get curious and just tinker, right? And I appreciate that. That tends to be the kind of computer user I am. But from also a practical standpoint, is a lot of times applications have a bunch of menu items. You look at them and go, oh my God, I have no idea what this is. I'm out of here, right? And that's fine too. That's an okay approach. Sometimes it's better not to tinker with stuff and break it rather than experiment and not know how to go back to what is normal, for example. But let's take a look at the server status tab here. And you'll notice that it indicates, for example, that the server is running. And if we were using this in a production environment, any particular database or databases, and this really kind of is an overview of all the databases that are running on MySQL server. And there's a bunch of them, right? And you can see here, there's like a little dashboard. And if these databases were in active use by users from a bunch of different locations or computer systems or out on the web or whatever, I would see a chart here of like how many people are connected, how much traffic is moving about. And if I, like I said, if I was in a production environment, you would see data on this little panel. It also shows, for example, like what features are turned on and off, right? It doesn't mean that you can come in here and turn them on and off, but it shows you whether things are on and off and what settings are available. Now, without going into the details of all the particular pieces of information here, some of them are kind of intuitive. But for example, right, the host, this is the name of my host machine. That's what I named my machine. MySQL, it shows the port number. So in other words, if you were on my local network and you wanted it to attach to MySQL database, provided the ports are open and shared through the firewall, it's on port 3306. A lot of people don't know this about networking, especially people that don't study that topic. But when you are in the network connection, a network connection in a modern network has basically a little over 65,000 port addresses available to it. So for example, that would be like if you turned on your cable TV and it had like 65,000 plus channels, right? All going over that one connection. We don't know how it works, but it does, right? Networking protocols work the same way. And often very specific pieces of software choose certain port addresses to transmit and receive their information. MySQL's typical port address is 3306, right? Does anybody know what the typical port address is for the internet? Like when you're looking at HTTP or HTTPS? It's kind of a quiz. All right. Well, web people, and web people should get to know this, by the way. So if you're in the web program, it's port 80 is the port that we use for the internet protocol. So HTTP operates over port 80. When we do FTP, web people know that one too. That uses two ports, port 21 and port 23 or port 22. I forget which is the second one. I think it's port 23. One to send commands and the other one to actually do data transfers. And those ports go on and on. So like if I did email, that uses a port. If I did secure web pages, that uses a different port. And if you start digging into applications, they all use different port addresses. It also shows which version of the software I'm running. That's important. Just for example, we just got a notification from our security team here at Gateway this week. Christian, her, and I run the web servers for the web program and for the data analytics program. And so in other words, we administer the servers. We don't have our IT department do it. They ran a penetration security test on our servers and said, oh, you got these 5 or 6 pieces of software that are a little out of date and you need to update them. Otherwise, we will fail our security test and then we will shut your servers down. So in other words, you need to know your version numbers because sometimes the reason you upgrade software is to improve security, right? Usually the upgrades are mostly security based. We are running version 8 of MySQL, and it looks like 8.0.39, whatever that means. And I'm running the community version, which is the free version, and I'm running on a Windows machine in 64-bit mode, right? So you see the Win64, and it shows exactly where the software is located in the INI file. And it's been running since, well, whenever I turned my computer on last, right? And I do have it so it auto runs. And then you'll see this little dashboard here too of all the different things that are enabled and not enabled. And I wouldn't say that I'm running it in a very secure mode, but we're doing local development work here. But if you were in a production environment, chances are you'd ramp up the security to the highest possible level, especially if your organization runs on that data, right? You don't want to have it polluted. Right, so that's the status page. One thing you will notice when you do open those panels and when you go to close those panels from this menu, there's a little bit of a delay, right? So it takes a moment. So be patient, basically. All right, next tab is the client connection. So this shows all the different things that are actively connected to my database right now and what they're doing in the background. And I mean, you can kind of dig into this pretty far, but apparently the root account is attached to a bunch of different processes here. There's not really a lot going on, but you can monitor who's connected and what they're doing in this panel. All right, I'm going to close that one. Let's notice the slight delay. All right. The other panel, and this is one where we're going to spend a little bit of time tonight. So you can open this one up and not close it for now, but we are going to take a really quick look. This panel shows all the users that are available in the database. Some of these travel with the system automatically. So for example, the root account is default, right? And then we have some other ones which are like system accounts that run in the background, each with different levels of authorization that go with them. For example, the root user, if I look at them and then look over here on the side, I can see their login name, the type of authentication they use, and there's multiple different kinds. And you notice for the root user, it's set to a pretty high level of encryption. We won't do that when we create our accounts, but that's a good idea. Then we have what machine are we connecting to? And this is kind of weird because, you know, from MySQL Workbench, and this is not something that we have explored, right now we're connecting to a database on our own computers. But that's not all you can do with it. In fact, if I wanted, for example, I could connect to Prometheus. Now, my web students know what that is. So we have a web server at prometheus.gtc.edu, right? And I could put that web address in this spot. And if there was an account for me on that machine and a password, it would connect over the internet, provided all the connections are correct, and allow me to remote connect to a remote database. This is pretty powerful. This is not something we've done in this class. But when I teach my Java 2 class, if any of you are taking Java 2 in the spring with me, we do exercises where we do connect to a remote database and have our local program code connect to a database somewhere else, pull the data back, and we can not only pull the data back, but change the data too, right? So it is capable of doing that. But right now you'll notice that this is set up for local host. In terms of the web world and server hosting, local host means the local machine, right? So if I'm running this software on this computer, local host means this computer is where the server is located. Otherwise, it's a host name, like a web name, or an IP address that you're usually putting in here. The other option is a percent sign, and I don't know if you guys can see that. And the percent sign is a wildcard that refers to, in at least database speak, a thing we call any host, right? That's kind of a dangerous setting in some capacities, but required in some capacities too, if you don't know what the connections are in the background. So it kind of lets you like circumvent some connection issues. There's limits that we can set for the account. So how many queries somebody can do simultaneously and how many connections they can have and all that. We can also describe the roles. The root user has all the roles and all the capabilities. All the boxes are checked, by the way. That's the DBA role, by the way. And then we can also, if we're not assigning roles here, we can also provide schema privileges, meaning, okay, a schema is basically the structure of your database, all the stuff you see over here on the table. And I can, for example, create a user and give them access only to very specific databases with only very specific capabilities. And that's what we're going to do today. That's our kind of our main goal. We'll come back to this panel though, leave it open, maybe go back to the login tab here, but I'm going to go back to the menu here and move on to the next item. Another screen that they have is what we call server variables. And these are a bunch of different settings that are internalized basically inside the system. So you can look at some of the things that are listed here, right? So for example, like in the general area, they have a bunch of different settings. In some circumstances, you can actually tweak these settings. This is not exactly where you do them, but the way that the database is set up is basically indicated by all the different settings in this panel. I certainly don't have time to talk about all these, but being familiar with it is pretty important. Like for example, often when you're working with files or something like that, you know, there's limits, for example, as to how big an entry can be or how many times you can post it in or things like that. And sometimes if you're a DBA, you can go in and tweak these little settings to adjust things to make your database work a certain way, right? So this is kind of like the master listing of all the settings for the system. So there's status variables and there's system variables too, you know, that you can look at. And if you just want to kind of explore, very, very cautiously, do not change anything in these panels, right? Otherwise, you might find yourself like reinstalling or trying to fix it. As you move down the menu, you'll notice they have two different areas here for the import and export of data. And so in other words, if I have a database and I want to export its structure to import it to a different database server somewhere else, I would use the export command. And if I want to import an export from a different database, I can do it through the import menu. I won't bring up those screens, but just so you know that it's there. There's other ways to do the imports and the exports. These tools are really kind of designed to automate the process and allow you to click on screens and panels and makes little, you know, check boxes and OK buttons and stuff like that to make it easier. But for example, if I export a database, often it will export with a SQL file that will contain all the commands necessary to create the database, all the tables, and insert all the data, like in one file. And then if you have a file like that, all you have to do is go to your query window, import the file into your database, and then execute the queries, and the database is built. Right? So that's kind of a little extra piece of information. There's a startup shutdown here. There is a button. You shouldn't click it, right? Like right now our server is running, but if I wanted to stop it for some reason, I can come in here, hit the button, and it's not running. Nobody can connect. It's offline. The other thing that you can do is instead of stopping it, you can just have it disconnect from the outside world. So this is something typically only a DBA would do, right? Not like a regular user. Going down to the next one, if you want to look at all the logs, and I think this is really kind of interesting because if you are looking to see if were there any errors, you can actually have it read, you know, the error logs, and you can see them here. And now I'm not sure why this isn't loading anything right now, maybe because of the way I'm implementing it. But in principle, you can look at all the activity that's happening on your database right here. Now, you guys might be looking at this and you might have stuff on your screen. I'm not really sure why mine's not coming up at the moment. Not a big deal though. But if I was yeah, none of these are. Oh, permission. I might be in the wrong mode, so I apologize. But you can see your server logs here if you're an administrator, and that sometimes is helpful. There's also the options file, and if I gave you any cautions before about the settings in that other panel, this is the spot where you really, 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 really don't want to mess with stuff unless you really know what you're doing. Um, because here there is a series of tabs, right? And I just kind of like flip through them really quick so you can see what some of them are. And there's check boxes, and then you can hit the apply button, and that setting you just made is going to stick on your system. This is not somewhere where you should mess with things unless you know exactly what you're doing. I would call this hyper advanced skill sets here, right? And usually, even if you are making a change in here, it's maybe you're looking for one box or one place to type something in, and then that's about all you do with it, right? Because this can really severely break stuff, by the way. All right. From there, we go to the dashboard, and the dashboard's kind of a nice little graphical representation of what's going on. It's kind of like that other dashboard that we saw earlier. So it shows you the status of your network, right? And you can see I have a little activity there. That must be me. Right? Who else would it be? And then how is MySQL running, right? What's my efficiency level? And we didn't really get into this, but if your efficiency is dropping, that means your data is fragmented and you have to kind of do an efficiency thing. And then you also have this InnoDB, and this is kind of a tool that basically buffers all the information coming in and out from your database. All right. There's also these performance reports, right? So like if you were looking at like how your total memory is being used, or top IO by file name, like the most read writes I've had. I mean, all the stuff is in here. Crazy amount of detail for what we're doing, highly irrelevant. If I was running a huge enterprise database, I'd probably monitor this stuff constantly to see what's efficient, what's not efficient, where I'm having problems, and fix things, basically. All right. There's a couple more panels here. There's a schema setup. I'm going to kind of skip that one. There's the management access settings, and I'm going to just pull that one up quickly. And if you look at this, if you guys remember when we first did the install, these are some of the settings that we did way back then, right? And a lot of it was kind of automatic. And typically we don't want to mess with this after the fact, but sometimes it does become necessary. Some of the important tabs are like the connection. Notice we're connected to localhost port 3306. The username is root. Remember this when we set up this screen way back early on. There's also the ability to allow for remote management. So like right now, you can only administer the database by sitting on this machine. All right. What if it was out on a network somewhere or out on the internet somewhere? If I wanted to be able to administer from outside this environment, I'd have to flip the switch here and allow for it to happen. And then here is kind of a reiteration of the machine profile. All right. So that's all the, that little highlight of that tab. It's got some pretty deep stuff on it, but we are going to focus on the user and privileges area. All right, so let's move on to step number 3. All right, so we went to users and privileges. Step number 4, in the user panel on the left, click on the root user account and explore the tabs. Notice that the root user has all privileges and can basically do anything to the server and control any tool related to the operation, including control of all the databases. So I know that these screens can be a little hard to see, and unfortunately, I'm not sure how much zoom in. I can't do any zoom in on this, so we're kind of stuck at this resolution. So hopefully you guys can see it okay. On the first tab, once again, you can control the user account, the authentication method, their limits. But the tab we really want to look at here is this one here. And these are in the panel on the left here. What we're seeing are pre-configured, standardized MySQL user roles for administrators, basically. none of these, aside from maybe the custom role at the bottom, is capable um, of being just a normal user. All of these have some really high level function. I want you to notice that there's all these privileges here on the left, and many of these, or excuse me, on the right. And you'll notice as you kind of look through the commands, like alter and create and delete and drop and etc. A lot of the SQL commands that we learn. So what it's telling you is, depending on the role here, and I'm going to kind of flip through the role, and you'll see that it doesn't matter here. They're all turned on because the DBA can do all of it, right? And therefore doesn't need any schema privileges. By contrast, if I look at any of the other roles here, for example, messages user, notice that that admin can delete, insert, select, and update on which database? Any database, basically. Their roles are much more limited. In fact, they can't really do any of the admin tasks at all. They're just looking at messages. You see the difference? So they can't like create users or do backups or design the database or run any of these commands. They can only run the commands that are listed here in the schema privileges. If you look at maybe a different user, right, you'll notice that it'll become custom, and they'll have, for example, the MySQL session user only has the capability of shutdown and super, right, and schema privileges of select, right? So much more limited task set. However, right, shutdown's a pretty powerful command, right? You won't want to give that to anybody. You know, hey, you're a new user, shut down the database. Okay, go for it. You know, not what you want to happen. All right. So that's kind of the lay of the land here, and we'll see more of this as we kind of move forward. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new account. Now I'm going to move my instructions over to the other screen, so I'm going to use them as kind of a script here, as opposed to reading them to you. But what I'd like us to do is click in this panel right here and click Add Account. And you'll notice it'll default to a new username of new user. Now, I already did this to test it the other day when I was building the assignment description. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call mine new user 1, right? Now you'll notice there's 3 different authentication levels that we can use here. For the admin, it's set to basically the highest level, which is the SHA-2 password and its caching. And then there's also the SHA-256. And basically what this means is it's a 256-bit encryption on the password. And really, if we were in production mode, I'm just saying this out loud, we'd want as high an encryption rate as possible, right, to try to prevent hacking, right? If we use standard, it uses, I'm not going to say low level encryption, it uses a lower level encryption, and I'm not really sure what encryption standard it uses. But basically what it does is it hashes your password. So in other words, it takes whatever your password is and turns it into gobbledygook, but it's stored as plain text, right? And if you knew the right algorithm, you could decipher it. What that algorithm is, we don't know. Since we're working on our local machine, you could leave this set to a %sign. I don't think that's really a good idea. I think it's better to say local host to make sure it points back to your own machine, right? So that's the recommended setting there. And then you then need to put in a password that ideally has uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and a special character. It will let you get by, so just heads up, with less than that. So I think the minimum is 6 characters, something like that. And I'm not doing a particularly complex one. I'm doing one that I can remember, real frankly. And it's telling me it's weak, but hey, whatever. It's not stopping me from doing it. It's just telling me that it's weak. All right. You'll notice they also have an expire password option here, and that only enables under certain situations. But once you have the password in and it matches, go ahead and click apply. right? It's telling me, it's warning me here. It says, consider using a password with 8 or more characters with mixed case letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. Okay, not doing it today, but maybe you should. If you have one that you like to use, I'm just trying to keep it simple. Now, once that's set, then I can choose a time to expire the password if I want. So for example, force the user like in, I don't know, 90 days, 6 months, whatever, to change their password. I'm not worried about that right now. This is just a demo. If I was in production mode though, I would do this in accordance to whatever my company's policy is for doing that. And I don't know, like if you guys are in that situation at work, for example, you have to change your password every so often. I do find it cumbersome, but it is a really good way to enhance security. All right. You will see on the left panel now that the new user is listed. And now we can go through and we can set the limits or the settings for the other tabs. Right. All right. So, all right. So we completed step 6. And it says in number 7 that we're not going to make any changes to the account limits. We don't care how many connections they have. We don't care about the administrative roles because we don't want to make this user an administrator of any sort. But okay, so here's the interesting thing. It is a chance to kind of play with some of these things. Like, so for example, I could click on this, and I want you to notice when I click on one thing, how it might click other things on too. And as I click certain things on, certain capabilities become available. And when I click DBA, it turns on everything, right? And if I click on DB Manager, it turns on some things and turns on a couple of other roles. That's kind of interesting, right? But we're leaving all of this turned off for now. We're just creating a regular user, right? So then we're going to go to the schema privileges here. And we want to give this new user access to only one database. And I'm going to choose to do that with the MyGuitar database. So in the schema thing here, you'll notice the bottom right, there's a thing that says add entry. All right. And here there's the option for all schema. Notice the wildcard again, the % meaning I could let this user access any database. Okay. Well, you know what? I don't want them to access every database. I just want them to do the selected database, which is my guitar shop. That's the only one that they can look at and mess with. So I'm going to choose that one and say, okay. All right. Now that I have that highlighted, right? So I come back up to the table here and I highlight it. Then I can decide which rights I am going to allow this user to have. Now, I want you to notice from all the checkboxes here, I can do all the standard like query commands, right? That's in the first column. I can do all the create and destroy tables, routines, and all that kind of stuff here. And then there's these other miscellaneous things. For example, like the grant option is basically what we're doing now. We are granting users privileges, and you can do that with the grant menu. I do not want them to have that capability. In the instructions in step 9, I suggest that you allow them to select, insert, and show view. That's it. That's all we're going to let this person do. We don't want them updating things. We don't want them deleting. We don't want them executing things. Just those 3 things. They can look at stuff, they can insert a record, and they can trigger a view and look at its contents. That's it. Once you've checked the boxes, click apply. All right. And then if you come back and re-click on that, you'll see that those selections are active. Now, this is one spot. So this is our first screenshot spot. So what you should do at this point is screenshot this screen. And if I was like screenshotting this, really frankly, I wouldn't grab the whole screen. I would probably just like screenshot kind of like, this area here and really even tighter, maybe like more like this tight, so I would capture that and insert that screenshot. Okay, no questions to answer here. Just want to see that you did that part of it. So new users highlighted. I see the schema. I see the selections. All right, and then we'll move on to the next step. Right. So now we got to test this new account. So this is how we're going to do it. Um, right now, we are connected with the root user account. And in order to switch to a different user account, I have to close the connection. So what you're going to do is you're going to go up to the file menu and you're going to choose close connection, right? And the way that MySQL does this, and you can go ahead and click on it, is I do want to show you up here at the top, right? There's this home thing that takes you back to the welcome string. You can always go back to it, by the way. And you can close this connection. And I do prefer that you close the connection. And the reason for this is that way you're not confusing the two. So that's the way I'm going to do it. But it is also possible that in this tab, I'm the root, and then I can open up a new tab and have a lower level user there, right? I'm going to prefer to close the connection tab. So file, close connection tab. That takes us back to the main screen. All right. Now, in order to connect with the new account, we have to create a new connection tile here on the main screen. So what you need to do is click the little plus sign. So we're on step number 11 right now, if you're wondering. And we need to give the connection a name to start with. So we're going to say, how about we call it test new user? I'm going to call it demo. Connection method, standard TCP IP. There's no reason to change it, but if you're curious what the other options are, you can look, right? For right now, we'll stick with that. That'll work. Notice the host name. Okay, this is kind of weird. 127.0.0.1. Does anybody know what that is? Okay, it's an IP address. Yes, you're correct. But that's a special IP address. It's a reserved IP address. And 127.0.0.1 is an IP address way of saying local host. It's what we call the loopback IP address. So if you run like a web server, for example, and you want to connect to your local instance, you can type localhost or you can type 127.0.0.1 and connect. And so what this is basically saying is localhost port 3306. We want to connect with our new user account here. So we want to get rid of root. And I'm going to connect with new user 1. That's what I called mine. Right now, it's not asking for a password. I'm going to leave that alone. It also is saying a default schema, but think about this, so if I knew like what database I was connecting to, I could list it. I'm not going to do that because why? I already set up this account so it only accesses one database anyhow. So leave that blank. Let's test the connection, right? It's going to ask you for your password. So hopefully you remember it, right? Kind of a problem if you don't. You can save it if you wish, right? That's up to you. Then I'm going to say, okay. And hopefully you got the screen that says success, right? All right. So once you get past that success screen, you can click OK. And then you have your new connection tile. Here's another screenshot point. Screenshot the new connection tile. All right. Moving on to step number 12. And then I will tell you that in a few minutes here, we will take a break. We'll try to do a few more steps, and then we'll take a break. All right. So let's go ahead and click the new connection. Right. It brought up a blank query window like we're used to, but I want you to notice in the left sidebar the schema, right? Notice the only database I have available is my guitar shop. And if I click the arrow, I'm already pre-connected to it. I can expand the views, right? I have all my tables. I can even go into a table and look at the contents, right? I can do that. Okay, why can I look at the contents? Well, it's a select command. I'm allowed to do a select command. And remember how I did that is I just went to the table and hit that last little icon and it automatically does a wildcard select from whatever table I'm on. Right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that tab for now. Okay, so step number 13, says, expand the tree if you wish. Notice that the other databases do not appear, right? We did all that. So now we're going to create a new query. So in the query tab, let's start first by making sure we're attached to the database. We're going to say use, and here I can actually zoom in. So use my guitar shop semicolon and execute the query. And notice it's okay. It worked. All right. Next, it says to view the products or view the contents of the product table. Now, you can do this real frankly. If you want to click that little icon to do it, I'm fine with that. But it might not be a bad idea to just type the query. So let's just say select star. We just want to look at all of it, right? From the products table with a semicolon. All right. Go ahead and execute your query, and you should see the output. Take a really quick screenshot. And I would, if I was taking the screenshot, I would like move this up here, and then I would probably screenshot like, I don't know, like this, for example. Yeah. Drawn better though. Right. I'm trying to do it with a pen free form. It's not really great. Working out too great. I ran out of mouse space. So that would be your screenshot. All right. We'll do one more action here. We'll do number 16 and then we'll take our break. So now we're going to write another query. I'm going to move that one down. I'm just going to add to this. And in number 16, we're asked to view the contents of the view called customer info. Remember when we created that the other day, right? So if you're not seeing that, it should be under views. And if you named it the same as I did, it should be VW underscore customer info or similar, right? So we're going to write a query to pull out the contents. It's a very simple query again. We're just going to select everything from, and it's not from a table this time, we're selecting it from a view, remember, which is a pre-designed query, basically. So customer info semicolon. And go ahead and execute that one. And hopefully it worked, right? And then once again, you're instructed to take a screenshot. All right, we're going to go into break right now, though, because we've been going for a while. So pausing. All right, back from break, and now we're going to resume with number 17. And now it's asking us to attempt to create one new table with one column, naming it anything you wish. And I have an example query here. And of course, I'm just going to copy and paste it in. And here's my sample query, right? And, I was like creating tables called whatever, just because I'm not thinking of anything. And I'm throwing in one column with characters, right? And I'm just calling the column testing to see if I can do it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and try to execute this command. And then what happens? Well, you will notice there is an error. So question or, step number 18 is the question. It says, what happened? So what did happen? Well, this is why we have our error log. It says error code 1142. Create command denied to the user, new user one at localhost for table, whatever. So what that's telling me is, sorry, new user one, you don't have the user rights to be able to create a table, right? And think about this, right? If you just want somebody to extract information from your table or look at a view or add a record, you don't want them creating tables, right? So, okay, so the answer, did it work, is no. The reason why is this user does not have that level of access rights. They don't have that capability assigned to them. That's number 18. So we go to number 19. It says, what's the error in the console? And you should screenshot that if you can and show it. Right. And not that you would memorize error codes, but people who work in certain database systems and see these error codes all the time know what they are without having to read them. Um, but they're numbered for a reason, right? And they're very specific. All right, moving on to step number 20. It says, now attempt to insert a new record into the categories table. And I have, once again, a piece of sample SQL code here that you could use. Right. And the command I have is insert into the categories table. And notice the parentheses, we're going to insert a category name and the value for accessories. Now, if you remember with categories, and this is a sideline, by the way, you don't need to do this step, but if I look, that was customers. If I look at the categories table, what's in it, right? It's the category ID and the category name. So why am I not adding the ID number? Okay. Well, if I look at the structure of that table, if I just click on it in the schema, I have a little column descriptor. Okay. Well, we have the varchar category name, so I can make it up to 255 characters, I guess. And the category ID, well, I see it's an integer. It's got the PK, so it's the primary key. But what's the AI all about? They got like a chatbot built in? No. That stands for auto increment. So I don't need to add that. Anytime I add a category name, it's going to automatically increment the category ID. And you can see when I did my testing, I added a category called accessories. And now I got to think of a new category because I have, guitars, drums, basses, and keyboards. Now I can think of another category. So I'm going to go back to my main query here. Instead of adding accessories, that's what you guys should add. Oops, a little too far there. I'm going to add one called sheet music. That's my new category. And you know what? This is the modern era. A lot of musicians now use software. They could have a software category. So yeah, I'll do software instead. Then I'm going to go ahead and execute the query. And did it work? Well, it says it worked. Let's go take a look. So I'm going to go to the categories table and I'm going to look. And sure enough, there is a new category ID and software is now included. And in other words, for step number 20, and actually 21, the question is, what happened in the above step? Did it work and why? Well, the answer is obviously yes, it worked. Why did it work? Well, we gave the user permission to insert records. That's why. Right. For step 22, take a screenshot of the above step, and you can do that a number of different ways. What I guess what I would prefer is that maybe you show me the insert into in the success message, and then if you can go to the categories table and show me that it actually ended up there, that would be helpful too. Right, so they could see the new category. You might have named yours accessories. I named mine software. That was step 22. All right. Now, as users might do, right, they might get curious and go, you know what? I've never looked in the server menu before. Maybe I'm going to go up there and see if I can figure out how to run the server. And maybe I could hack the server and bring down this evil corporation I work for. I'm kidding. And I say that like in jest. But if I go to the users and privileges panel, right, I just want to look at my own user setup. Oh, wait a second. I don't see anything. Okay. So why am I not seeing anything? Just blank. It says I can add an account, but I'm not really sure I can even do that. But it tells me right here, it says the account you are currently using does not have sufficient privileges to view the client connection. So I can't look at what other users are on the system. I can't change their passwords. I can't give them settings. I can't give them access rights, none of that stuff. Because I am not an administrator. I'm not a user administrator, and I'm not a database manager, and I'm not a DBA. I'm a query guy for my guitar shop. That's about it. So that's the why. All right. Now they're asking us to close the connection. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can do it two ways. You can close the tab up here. I'm just in the habit of going to the menu. So I'm going to go to File, Close Connection tab, and we are back to the welcome screen. Now you'll notice that connection will persist here. You can always, if you want, if you don't like the way it's set up, you can adjust the connection using a little widget here. You can add more connections, whatever you need. All right. So now in step 25, it says they want us to, or excuse me, step 24 is to go back to our root account. So I'm going to bring up the root account again. So now I can see all my databases. And they want us to go ahead and create a new database with the name of your choosing. Now, in my demo, I went ahead and created one called whatever, but since I do want to demonstrate actually doing it, I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to say create database. I'm going to call it whatever 2, right? Just to be a little snarky. All right. I'm going to go ahead and execute the query. Looks like it worked. And then I'm going to come over here to the schema panel and do a refresh. And now I can see my database. Right. And then I'd like you to screenshot that. I would grab the schema panel and the command. That's step 25. All right, moving on to step number 26. Now it's asking us to create a new user account. So now we're going to go to the server panel again, back to users and privileges. We're going to add an account. And this one we're going to call, well, I'm suggesting that we call it new admins. Instead of new user, I'm going to call it new admin. I'm going to stick with the standard authentication for now. I'm going to change this, of course, to local host. And I'm going to preset a password. Right. And I'm making sure I choose something I will remember in 5 minutes. Right. And I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, by the way. And then okay, I could have made all my settings at once and then hit apply, but I like to do this part first, hit apply, and then move to the next tab. That's just my thing. We're skipping the account limits again. We're going on to the administrative roles. And here we're going to click on DB Manager. And I want you to notice what rights it has by default. Grants full rights on all databases, right? So this person can allow others to do stuff on databases. Notice when I click DB Manager, it also turned on Database Designer and Backup Administrator. And then notice all the rights that were clicked on. Not everything, but certainly a lot. And if you look really carefully at all these, all the standard stuff that we do in a database, select, create, and insert, and all that stuff, all of that's on the list. All the stuff that we learned, basically. All right. In the scheme of privileges, I'm not going to set anything, right? Because this person's an administrator. They can do anything they want on any of the databases, and that's how we want it, right? So once the settings are set in the administrative roles, click apply one more time. You should be seeing the new admin account appear in the left panel. If for any reason you're not seeing it, be sure to click refresh. But make sure that you've hit apply first. Like mine's grayed out because I already hit it. If it's not grayed out, that means there's changes waiting to be saved. So you got to make sure you click it, right? But then ultimately you should see the account, and then you should be able to review your settings, the same ones that you set before, right? two tabs we really worked on are these two. All right. Now, once again, we're going to close our root connection. So I'm going to go back up to the file menu. And okay, so it is asking for screenshots. I don't know if you guys want to screenshot maybe both the login panel here and the administrative roles panel for new admin. Like I would highlight it, grab that, highlight it, and grab that. And then when you're ready, click close connection. Okay. All right, it says following the steps in number 11 above, create a new connection for the new account. So now we're going to create a connection for the new admin account. So click the little plus sign, right? We'll call it new admin access or whatever you want to call it. We'll stick with TCP/IP, local loopback address 127.0.0.1 or local host port 3306 is fine. And then the new user account is new admin. I'm not declaring a default schema, right? In other words, what database you want it to connect to by default, I'm not declaring it. All of them will be available. Testing the connection, prompting for the password, enter your password in, and then click OK. Success, okay? So then say OK, and OK. All right, there's your new tile. Right. Once you have the tile created and it's working, I just want to see that you created it here. So take a screenshot of that. Just a few more steps to complete, you guys. So we're doing pretty good on time, thankfully. All right, so now we're going to connect up using the new admin account. Go ahead and click the tile. And you'll notice, difference right off the bat is this account can see all the databases, including the new whatever databases that I created here on the side. All right. And for example, it says click on it, right? If you want to look at it or whatever, and then that we should attempt to delete it. So probably the best way to do it is to do it through a command. And of course, if you want to drop a database, I don't know if you have to use a database to drop it. Let's just try dropping it directly. So I'm going to say drop database. I'll spell it right though. Let me zoom in a little bit. And I have a whatever and a whatever two. I'm just going to delete the one I just created, whatever two. And let's see if it works. Okay, and it disappeared immediately from the schema. All right, so the question for number 29 is, did it work? And the answer is yes, it worked. Okay, and then the question is, why did it work? Well, the answer is very simple, because we gave this person administrative capabilities. They gave them the capability to do it. That's just as simple as that. For step number 30, it says, now go to the users and roles panel again, or users and privileges actually is what it says. Interesting. And can this user delete the new user account that we created earlier? Why or why not? So I'm going to go ahead and click. I have two new user accounts. I'm going to click on the first one, and I'm going to go ahead and delete. Well, I'm going to guess because the button's available that it probably works. And once again, right, so it's asking, be permanently removed, please confirm. There's no undo for this stuff, by the way, right? There's no control Z. Once you blow away the account, it's gone. So I'm clicking delete, and you can see immediately in the panel, it disappears. All right. So once again, the question is, why does this work? Well, we gave the new admin the role to be the database manager, which includes the grant option, which allows you to control users, basically. So the short answer is really this user has the administrative rights to do it. That's why it worked. All right. Then we're all done, folks. So I'm going to go ahead up to the file menu and I'm going to click close connection, right? Then if you wish to go back in, you can. Now, I'm going to go ahead and terminate the video here. So this completes the lab assignment step by step. And so this video formally ends here. Hopefully it taught you a thing or two, or at least showed you some things maybe you did not know before.